In the last demo, I showed you how to add spatial layers to your QGIS project and explore the data that they contain. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to work with coordinate reference systems, or CRSs. CRSs are not simple or intuitive. They can be a bit of a pain in the butt. But I'm going to try to give you a brief orientation and enough information that you can get started with your work and not run into major issues. The good news is that QGIS has developed a lot of new functions in recent years that make it much more simple to work with CRSs than it used to be. So you can find our CRS for this project down in the lower right-hand side. It says EPSG and then 2263. That 4-digit code is going to be a kind of shortcut to tell us what CRS we're looking at. This is not the CRS that this project originally started in. It started in a default CRS, which is numbered 4326, a very common one. But when I added my first layer to the map, that layer, which if you remember, it was these borough boundaries for New York City, that layer was set to 2263. And that's because 2263 is our CRS that is defined for the specific part of New York State that New York City is in, including Long Island. And so when you add shapefiles or spatial data that is produced by New York City government agencies or created specifically to analyze New York City, it is usually projected into the CRS of 2263. So let's see what happens when I add some data that is not specifically tailored to New York City. In this case, I'm going to add a point layer of stormwater outfalls, and this comes from New York State. So the data covers more than just New York City. So to do that, I'm going to drag in a GeoJSON file, which is a different spatial data format than we've been using, but just as helpfall. This is a single file rather than the multiple files that shapefiles are. So I'll just drag these stormwater outfalls into my project. And what comes up is this pop-up window. At the top, it says select transformation for stormwater outfalls. And this is because stormwater outfalls, that layer is projected into a different coordinate reference system than the 2263 that my project is now in. And so QGIS wants to give it a transformation to put it from that CRS, that's its default, into our project CRS of 2263. And generally, the first option it gives you is totally fine to use. So you'll see this window, but you don't have to worry about it. You can just click OK. And you'll see some kind of an indicator of what's going on here in this preview window down here. You can see Long Island, and as I mentioned, the New York City specific CRS is accurate for all of Long Island. One thing I didn't mention is why there are these different CRSs, and the basic reason is that there are many different ways to represent three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. And because there are many different ways to make maps, you pick one that is most appropriate for the specific map that you are creating. So a projection that looks good in Iceland is going to look very distorted for New York City, so on and so forth. So I'll click OK to do that transformation. And now I'm going to see a new point layer data of green dots on top of my New York City subway stations, these more beige orange dots. And if I zoom out, I'll see that that data covers much more than New York City. It is taking the shape of New York State as a whole. Although I don't have the outline for all of New York State, you can kind of see it, that big triangle up here. And then you can also see Long Island, and everything that's directly north of New York City has a lot of these. I'm going to use this zoom in tool to zoom back into New York City. So this worked pretty well. This layer that I brought in that was in a different CRS as my existing project was transformed And you can see that the data lines up really well with New York City, especially if you're familiar with the shape of the city and the fact that, a lot of these green points, for example, are here along what I believe is the Harlem River. So that makes sense that the sewer outfalls would be displaying right along the border of a borough. So I'm pretty confident that this is displaying my data correctly. So that's all good. Now let's see what happens if we put together our project in a different order. So I'm now going to start a new project, and I'm going to add the stormwater outfalls layer first. So I will drag it in. So you'll see that the EPSG here is 4326, and you might notice that the shape of the data is slightly different than what it was a moment ago. So I have my stormwater outfalls layer, and now I'm going to add the borough boundaries back. So now I've got that same window popping up telling me that it needs a transformation. And once again, that's because the New York City specific data is in a different CRS than the project. So I'll click OK for my borough boundaries. I'm going to drag the layer on the side below the stormwater outfall so you can see it behind instead of in front. And I will also add the subway stations. So you might notice now that New York City looks really squished. It does not look like a typical map of New York City, and you'll actually find a lot of maps when people are doing GIS projects that have this type of shape. And it is because they haven't reprojected into that 2263 CRS. Instead, they've left it generally in this 4326 projection. So this is really easy to change. I'm just going to click this button here. And instead of the projection of 4326, which is also called WGS84, I'm going to switch it back to this recent one we had, which is known as NAD83/New York Long Island. And then FTUS means that it's in US feet as a unit. If this wasn't coming up, I would be able to just type in the one I wanted here. I could type Long Island, and then I would see my CRS that I want come up here. I might have to scroll a little bit. Here it is, 2263, or if I know that I'm looking for 2263, I could just type that up here and find it. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to press OK to switch my project back into 2263, and you'll see that everything is now displaying in that much more familiar shape of New York City. It no longer looks squished. CRSs, as I mentioned, can be very irritating and frustrating when something is going wrong. To try to help with that process, I'm going to provide a really helpful link in the description. Sometimes you just have to try a few different things. Remember to check your project CRS. Also check the CRSs of your individual layers, which you can see by just hovering over them or by double clicking and going to your source. It'll also say what the assigned coordinate reference system is here. Good luck.